Well, Pat, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Jude.
Good weather, and here we are slaving away for the good of humanity, enlightening them about all sorts of things. And today we want to enlighten them with regard to a book called Say Nothing. Now, it's written by a guy that I hadn't heard of before, Patrick Radden Keefe, who appears to be an American. But you're the one that alerted me to its existence. What is it about that book in particular that you think is worth reading?
Jude, I must explain the background. I had never heard of Patrick Radden Keefe, and I hadn't heard of his Say Nothing either. It was an American woman I know who actually, she said it's a big book over here in America. Now, I actually asked a senior Sinn Féin person in Derry, and he said he had never heard of it. Yet it's a major story, and it's what the story is. The starting off point of the book is the much-traveled story of Jean McConville, but that's the starting off point. And what makes this book so different? It's not like Tim Pat Coogan or any of those historians like or Brian Feeney. It's about this, the history and the politics are the background. It's the human story. It reads like a novel. In fact, it very much reads like a novel. But there's a massive amount of details. Jude, I know you probably checked the same as I did. At the back of the book, there's page upon page of reference, sources, index, all the rest. Keefe, as far as I know, has a legal background. I think he qualified in law, but he obviously didn't practice too long. He became one of the star reporters for journalists with the New Yorker magazine, and he's won several major awards. And this book has won the Orwell Prize. But the thing about it makes it different for me is it sort of goes into territory that a lot of suppose the war is over and no one's done an analysis of the human. Everybody's done the politics, but what about the human? Like the story of Dolores Price, like what radicalized her, the story of Brenton Hughes. Like these people were ultras. They thought that the war should keep going until United Ireland was achieved. And they regard people like Gerry Adams and maybe to an extent Martin McGuinness as sellouts and all the rest of it. So there's two tribes or two parallel lines running here in the Republican movement. And in fairness, the one feeling I have with the book is it only explores the ultras about their point of view, how they felt betrayed. And like Dolores Price, I know you'll probably come to it later on, but like she ended her life totally disillusioned with the Republican movement. Brenton, the Dark Hughes, ended his life totally disillusioned. And you could keep on. Anthony McIntyre and all the rest, they think Adams and McGuinness were sellouts and so on. But the whole story revolves around the original sort of kidnapping, if that's the word you want to use, of Jean McConville, and it goes from there. But it's all about the human beings, and that's what makes it really, really interesting.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. He's a really good writer. I just took a quotation from him. Unfortunately, my version of it, as we were saying, is on Kindle, so there's no good me holding up my Kindle. And you had a hard copy, but you've lost it.
I can't find it.
Anyway, at the beginning of the book, he has what he calls an epigraph, and he says, he quotes from a guy called Viet Van Nguyen, and it is, all wars are fought twice, the first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory. And I think that's very, because he's giving the memories or the perspective of the Troubles from particular points of view, like Brenton Hughes and Dolores Price in particular. But as you say, he writes really well. He writes as like a novel. For example, early on in the book, he has this line: "One summer day in 2013, two detectives strode into the Burns Library in Boston College. They worked for the serious crime branch of the PSNI. Passing beneath colorful stained glass windows, they approached the treasury room." It's got the makings almost of a thriller.
Absolutely.
And he writes very, very colorfully and very energetically and clearly, I think. I really like that about him. And as you say, he focuses on Jean McConville's abduction and the Price sisters. He goes back to the story of their hunger strike in England. And also, of course, Brenton Hughes. Now, two of the people that are big in it also are Ed Maloney and Anthony McIntyre, whom he refers to throughout, and that is the word that's used of him, is called Mackers throughout. Now, he talks about the Belfast tapes, Now, we
Yeah.
would see them as the Boston tapes. That is,
Tips, yeah.
these tapes that were lodged by Ed Maloney and Andy McIntyre after interviewing quite a number of people involved in the Republican struggle during the Troubles and giving their view of things. Now, he does that he tells that story very well, and he tells us the kind of things that these people are going to be seeing or said, and then the complications that enter in when somebody demands to see these, like the PSNI.
PSNI, yeah.
Because the promise was given to the people who did the interviews that they wouldn't ever be revealed until they were dead. But my gripe is this, Pat. I thought that he presented certainly faithfully the Dolores Price's view of things, Anthony McIntyre's view of things, perhaps Brenton Hughes's view of things, Ed Maloney's maybe, but he seemed to accept their story as being this story. Like they were saying about Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness and so on as having sold out and were very disillusioned. But he doesn't ever make it clear that that's one perspective, because the fact of the matter is, of course, these people fairly well detested Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness and all of the Sinn Féin people who'd gone, or the Republican people who'd gone along with the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah,
that was something I missed, you know.
Well, Jude, I mentioned that ahead of you because that's exactly the conclusion I came to as well. The book is actually excellent, but there is that flaw in it. Like Martin McGuinness and Gerry Adams, I think Brenton Hughes was never a politician, nor were the Dolores Price. They were people. I think there was a whole moral code here thing. What they thought, at least, I'm paraphrasing, but what I think they thought was that once the Republican movement had settled for a peace process, that some way that the moral thing of a war was lost, that what they had done was no longer a fight for Irish freedom, but the killings were they just simply murders now. So I think somewhere in their heads, they sort of said, wait a minute, this is debasing what we have struggled and fought for. I would presume Dolores Price, there's one part of the book where it gives a graphic account of the forced feeding of Dolores Price by the prison authorities, and it is brutal, and I mean seriously brutal. And like Dolores Price started off, what do you call it, the Bortala. She was a young sort of from a Republican background, but they were marching, they had civil rights and all the rest of it, and they were pushed and shoved with clubbed with nails in them and bricks and whatever. And when she came home, her mother says, "Did you fight back?" And she says, "No, we didn't. We sort of ran away." So the thing, somewhere that was a catalyst for somewhere in her brain that no matter what you do, so she decided she would join the IRA. Now
she came from a very Republican. She came from a very Republican family. He emphasizes that.
Very, very much so. But then I think she got locked into this sort of thing that it was all or nothing. But life's not like that. And I think Martin McGuinness told me one time, he said, we could keep on fighting like this, and so could they, and nothing will ever change. So he says, we have to change something. And they sort of realized. Now, I don't think Brenton Hughes, the Dark Hughes, he was an operative. He was the main man in Belfast IRA, but he wasn't a politician. And I think he thought you just keep going and going and going. And no matter what price you pay for it, and no matter what price the community pays for it, Adams and McGuinness, I think they realized, wait a minute, there has to be some way out of this. We just can't keep on doing this. And, I remember McGuinness saying one time when they started talking about the peace, he actually did say to me one day, he says, "Pat, this is serious. This could actually get me killed." Because there are a lot of people, like, look at it like this, Jude, you've heard of that. I'm not unique in hearing this. I have heard a lot of disillusioned Republicans saying, is this what we spent, what fought the war for? So Martin and Gerry and people like that could go to Stormont, that all those people would spend their lives in jail. Well, so many lives lost, there's so many futures damned, for this, but that's the reality of it.
Yeah, but I think that to some extent, the author puts his backing to those people who rejected Adams and McGuinness and so on, and that notion of a settlement. While he tells a very human story very vividly, like you mentioned, Trollope, I mean, that description of her being in the river at Burntollet and
on
hauled
a
out
freezing
by an
cold
Irish
day,
seaman.
and somebody coming after her with a
Uh,
club with nails in it.
she's
Yeah,
afraid.
yeah,
It really is very vivid. But there's dangers in that, because then you begin to identify with those people because you know them so well after that description. And he
yeah,
never really corrects that.
yeah,
He tells you, well, this is what they said, and this is what they did, and this is their sad ending, and so on. He'll mention, not in passing, but to some extent, that Gerry Adams would deny this or whatever.
yeah,
But essentially, it seemed to me to be saying that all that we're told about Jean McConville is true, that she was a woman that was killed because she comforted a soldier who was dying.
yeah,
And to some extent, we're, I think, encouraged because of the sympathy we have for Dolores Price and the way he presents her, that somehow or another McGuinness and particularly Adams had betrayed them.
yeah,
But, you know, I just feel that the vast majority of Republicans would think that Adams and McGuinness did the right thing, and
yeah.
they went along with it. You know, the notion that all of those people had betrayed the struggle seems to me something that isn't emphasized enough in the book.
Yeah, and but by the way, the other thing, Jude, let's get this clear as well. Like there was a woman called Joan Connelly, a mother of 8, was shot dead by the British Army. Kathleen O'Hagan, I remember, she was 7 months pregnant, and she was a mother of 5. She was shot dead by the UVF. I think it was a young fella called Jane. By the way, her husband came home to find his, I think, 4 or 5 children, the oldest of whom was 8 or 9, sitting round holding their dead mother's hand. Like, there are certain killings in this country that are used for certain political reasons, and others that are totally ignored. Like one killing had a terrible effect on me. Was that young fella James Morgan? He was only 16. His body was found in a pit where they had dumped dead animals somewhere near Clough, I think it is, and all. He was much the same age in 1997 as one of my children. He had just done an exam, yet his name is never mentioned and all that. So there's 2 narratives here. There's in fact, maybe a hell of a lot more than 2, but this is one part of the story. And by the way, it's very good, and it's a series. I think it's a book that'll get a lot of currency, but it doesn't go the full story. There's another story. It's a great story as far as it goes, but have you? Martin McGuinness died without ever writing his version of the book. Gerry Adams, he has written some allegedly fiction and so on, but they made decisions based on what their assessment at the time, and a lot of there were realities that they had to face. There was a British government, an Irish government. There were their own community who wanted peace. There were people who were weary of war. So that doesn't factor in this. All this is about Gerry Adams said he wasn't in the IRA, and everybody knows he was in the IRA and all the rest. Yeah, big deal. I asked Martin McGuinness about that one time. He says, yeah, Pat, don't be stupid. He says, because if you admitted back then you were in the IRA, it was an automatic 5-year jail term. And if Gerry Adams had admitted it once back then, you can bet your life he would have been in for 5 years right away. So he started off saying he wasn't in the IRA, and he just keeps saying that.
I'll stick with it. I think the flaw in the book maybe is this, that he doesn't emphasize sufficiently the fact that Ed Maloney and Anthony McIntyre invited people to tell their story. And all of the people that they invited were people who were, I suppose we call them dissidents now. That is to say, they rejected the way Sinn Féin and Republicanism had gone with Good Friday June. He doesn't emphasize that enough. What else?
Look at somebody like Raymond McCarty, who was one of the leading hunger strikers. He was on hunger strike for 57 days. He totally, completely, and utterly supported Adams and McGuinness. Now, he doesn't think he was betrayed, as far as I can figure out, because he was Martin's best friend almost to the day Martin died. So, like, there's another story. There are plenty of people who are adamant and very tough Republicans with a track record to prove their loyalty and all that, who didn't think, like Anthony McIntyre, who didn't think, there's one bit in the book, I think it's Ricky O'Rourke claims there was a deal offered to the hunger strikers to put and all the rest of it. Now, obviously, Raymond McCartney doesn't believe that, because Raymond was on hunger strike, and he stayed friends with Adams and McGuinness to Martin's death, as I said before. So, like, there is another story. And, though I don't want to seem too critical of this book, because I think it's actually a very, very good book. and all, but it is worthy of serious debate because it puts a whole perspective out there.
Yeah, the very fact that we're talking about it so animatedly, and the fact that our time is now just about up, indicates the extent to which the book is very gripping. It's a very, I think, for anybody who hasn't, looked at the details, so to speak, of the Troubles, it's a wonderful sweep right through it from the very beginning.
Yeah, but the brilliant thing about it, Jude, it's human beings. It's not the politics.
It brings it alive. It brings it alive. As you say, it's like a novel, but it's not sensationalized either. It's sad. And I'd end with one thing that caught my ear. He mentioned that Eamon McCann went to see Dolores Price. Apparently he was a friend of hers towards the end of her life. And that, it was at her funeral. He spoke at her funeral. And he said something to the effect that the philosophies we've embraced have to some extent damaged us all. Have I got that right? Because that's
that was near enough
very bleak assessment.
That we all follow a path, and sometimes, I look at Dolores. She was apparently a very good-looking girl, very vivacious, and all the rest. And look at the road life took her down.
Mm-hmm. It's a very thought-provoking book, well written. Absolutely. And I'd advise anybody to go out and buy the copy. And I'm not even getting a percentage for that. Okay, Pat, thank you.
All the best. Good luck.